Generally, we post our recordings either permanently, sometimes on a YouTube channel, or if the speaker has asked us just keep it up for a week or so, or 2 weeks or a month, we'll take it down. But it is kind of there permanently. I think Richard has said we could put it up. Announcements. As I mentioned previously, we don't do monthly programs in July and August. We kind of take a break, and generally we haven't done field trips over the summer either because of the heat. But I do need to let you know that we'll probably be putting out a newsletter for July and August. And we're doing preliminary planning for a field trip at the end of July, maybe the weekend of the 23rd of July. We want to go to the Angeles National Forest and try to see lemon lilies. Apparently that's the prime time to see that rather wonderful lily. And so stay tuned on that. We'll post info on our Facebook page, lacnps.org. We'll also put it out as an email blast. We'll put it on our Facebook page so that you'll be able to go on that field trip if you choose to. Our programs for the fall, they're starting to shape up. We'll have a program on Tuesday. Somebody's coughing. Let's mute all. Sorry. On Tuesday, September 13th, Kat Superfisky, who's the urban ecologist for the city of LA, will be making a presentation. I think it'll be on urban ecology. We don't have it written up yet, but that's more than likely what the general topic. I mentioned about October, the CNPS conference is October 20th to 22nd. And we're all going to be busy in our chapter board working and going on that. So we are not going to do a Tuesday night program in October for that reason. There'll be plenty of things for people to find out about at that conference, which is in San Jose, again, October 20th to 22nd. November 8th, our program is going to be Cynthia Powell, who's the executive director of CalFlora. She's going to be doing CalFlora update for us. December 13th, we still don't have anything set. I'm working on that. And we're going to be running our plant sale around the beginning of November. Dates to be announced. It'll be again an online order, pay, and pickup setup. And our date for pickup is November, let me just double check the date. Sorry, guys. 19th. And that will be in Tarzana. We have a site for pickup. So that's so far what we're going to be doing in the fall. We will more than likely start up field trips, monthly field trips, sometime late in the fall too, because that's when it starts to cool down. Does anybody else have any announcements that they would like to make? If so, you can unmute yourself, raise your hand. Okay. Then, Richard, are you ready to go?
I am ready to go whenever you're ready.
Okay, let me do just a brief intro for you. Richard Rockman is, sorry, my phone is going to be ringing. Let me mute myself real quick. Okay, sorry. I'm in my office, so. Richard is a plant ecologist and grad student at Cal State Northridge. And he's also currently the LA County. Sorry. Joys of Zoom. He's also currently a volunteer coordinator for LA County for the Western Monarch Count. And I'm proud to also say that he's one of the recipients of our chapter's scholarship to go to the CNPS conference in October. So he's been very active with our chapter and does more than his fair share of plant activities. And I'm glad he's associated with our chapter. It's been a big pleasure working with him. And this evening, he's going to present his findings on post-wildfire plant succession after the 2018 Woolsey Fire. So, Richard, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Let's get that. Okay, cool. Is this good? Let's go back. All right.
That looks good.
Cool. All right. Again, my name is Richard Rockman. My pronouns are he, him, his. And today I'm going to be talking about wildfire, invasive and native plants, and being a plant ecologist in general. So again, I guess housekeeping. Keep your questions to the end. I would even prefer not in the chat. If you can just kind of remember them and then type them at the end, I'd really appreciate that, just to keep everyone not distracted. Thank you. But first, I'm going to talk about monarchs, and I'm using this platform to kind of promote some monarch conservation. So excuse me. These are monarchs overwintering at the Biono wetlands. This photograph was taken by Jonathan Coffin, and they're overwintering on eucalyptus. But monarchs actually don't have a preference for native or non-native trees. So if you're like, oh, monarchs love eucalyptus and non-native stuff, like, you could plant native trees too. So monarchs are in severe decline. Since about the 80s, we've had millions of monarchs and that are overwintering in the West Coast, right? So these are different than the monarchs that overwinter in central Mexico, which is the eastern population. They're in trouble as well, but Western monarchs especially. And there's a few, just to highlight a really bad year. I think it was 2021. So 2020 to 2021, they were down to about 2,000 Western monarchs. And that number has gone up, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But so why are they in such decline, right? One of the reasons why is loss of larval habitat, and that's milkweed, right? Their larval food source, and then loss of overwintering habitat, which is these groves of trees on the coast, right? Really close to the ocean. The other big factor impacting monarchs is insecticides that are killing them. This is on homes and on agricultural fields, and then herbicides, primarily in agricultural fields, that are killing their larval food source, milkweed, which can be ruderal and grow on the sides of like traditional grown crops like corn or soybeans. But if you use herbicide on those crops, then you often lose milkweed. And then disease, a protozoan called OE, which primarily resides on tropical milkweed, right? Which has a differing flowering period than our native milkweeds. And OE can persist on these tropical non-native milkweeds. And then that's really bad for monarchs. So then they asked me to help out with this. I know a lot of people, and I'm excited to help out where I can. And so I've been doing interviews, and I had no media training whatsoever. And I don't study insects, I study plants, but it's been a blast. I've really enjoyed the public outreach and talking with people about this really important organism, because it also gets people to plant more native plants, which is really exciting. So last year we had better numbers than we've had in quite a while. We had over 250,000 monarchs in the state of California. But the kind of sad number is that we've had even more sites monitored and more volunteers out there looking for monarchs, and the numbers aren't that great, right? So in the long term, it's not good news, but in the short term, hey, we'll take what we can get. And LA County hasn't had really strong monitoring. And so that's one reason they brought me on, is to kind of like boost our monitoring efforts. And we had better numbers than we've had almost in 2 decades. So it's exciting, but we have a lot of work to do, and we have to plant more milkweed. We have to get folks to stop using large scale pesticides. But what can you do? So you can get on iNaturalist. Here's a QR code that'll lead directly to this project, the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper. And this is where you can post pictures of wild monarchs and wild milkweed. So this isn't that gorgeous narrow leaf milkweed you're growing in your yard. This is the narrow leaf milkweed that you planted in your yard's offspring. So wild organisms that are like perpetuating themselves, not things that you planted. And so also not captive reared monarchs, but the monarch that returns to your yard the next year. That's interesting. Post that on iNaturalist. If it's not, make sure you post, you're marking it as captive or like landscaping or whatever. But yeah, and you can also batch upload your previous observations onto there. There's me, number 3 for most species of milkweed seen. I'm not 12, like that person's really cool. So join the iNaturalist project, you'll be helping out. But what if you want to like actually help me on the ground look for monarchs? Volunteer with me to monitor a site. Here's the QR code for the Xerces Society website. You can come monitor overwintering habitat with me. We have all these overwintering sites mapped out on the website. If you're by Death Valley, you can even go monitor a site out by Death Valley. Most of the sites are close to the coast, with an exception of like, there's one in Whittier and there's one in Porter Ranch. Most of them are really close to the coast. So if you live by like Malibu, Santa Monica, Playa del Rey, Long Beach, we need monitors. And there's actually a bunch of people in this meeting right now that have volunteered with me. So it's really cool, like Connie. So anyhow, hi Connie. But let's talk about fire, because that's why I'm here. And I'm really excited to talk about it today. So the Woolsey Fire happened in 2018. It was a super stressful time. We just had a tragedy happen at a club in Thousand Oaks. We, and a few days later, or maybe later that day, my memory is really fuzzy on it. We had the fire breakout in Woolsey Canyon. It spread really quickly, and it's one of the largest wildfires in Southern California. It was just a really dramatic event, and it impacted a lot of people. But from that, we had a lot of really interesting things come up, right? Like we've had a ton of observations of Astragalus brontonii, an endangered plant. So much so that its status might even be moved to threatened because of how large some of the populations are. It was just a really interesting time. And I'm really excited that I'm focusing my master's research on studying it, because I think it's really important that we understand wildfires more than ever in this climate change future that we're facing. So at that time, I was working as an intern with the National Park Service. He's one of my supervisors. He wasn't my supervisor at the time, but he's actually on this Zoom call right now. Hi, Mark. Super excited to hear. But I was an intern with the park restoration ecologist, Joey Algiers, doing like oak restoration and weed monitoring in the Santa Monica Mountains. Here's me holding a orb weaver spider, and I just got to work with oak trees. I absolutely love oak trees, and they also do a pretty darn good job of blocking embers. So even CAL FIRE is pretty excited about folks planting native oak trees in their yard. So something to think about. Of course, you need to like follow rules of like spacing in your house and stuff like that, but oak trees are pretty fantastic. I was monitoring plants on my off time. So this was like my intern hat was off and my private citizen, whatever hat was on. I was up in Amundsen Ranch in Upper Las Virgenes. And I think this picture really illustrates a point I'm going to make about burn severity later on. But I want to just kind of describe this scene. So this is pretty common up in Amundsen Ranch, where you have a lot of these invasive annuals, things like Brassica nigra, that they, once it rains in the winter, they like fly up in the air and get really tall, and then they kind of poop out in like a 3 or 4 or 5 months or whatever. And then you're left with these like dry stalks, right? And then below in the canopy, then you have Avena foetua, which kind of does the same thing. It gets really vigorous and green in the beginning, and then kind of poops out and then drops its seeds. And the seeds don't persist super long, like compared to some of like fire followers, but there's tons of seeds in the seed bank in an area infested with Avena fatua, this non-native annual grass. And then in the understory, you have something called Cucurbita fidodissima, coyote gourd, stink gourd, which was probably dispersed by things like Columbian mammoths and mastodons. It has a really strong smell. Coyotes are known to eat some of the seeds from it, but I don't even think they like it that much. But people did use coyote gourd and still use coyote gourd quite a bit. So we probably, indigenous people probably have a big part in its distribution too. But you can see that most of the structure of coyote gourd is actually underground. They have these massive root structures. So you might have a lot of dead material on top, but it's rocking out below ground. So this is really common in Amundsen Ranch. What I was looking for was this rare plant, and I did find like dead individuals of it, but this is Coryzanthe perrii variety Ferdinandina, which pretty much only lives on 2 places on Earth, Upper Los Virgenes in this area, and then also in this place in Santa Clarita. It used to be called Newhall Ranch. I don't know what, I think they took that name away and they're going to call it something else now because it's too controversial. Whatever, it's going to be stuck behind a fence. It's a really dumb idea. But so San Fernando Valley spine flower is kind of stuck in these 2 places. But at least in Upper Los Virgenes, it has like a significant amount of space compared to in Santa Clarita. But so I smelled the wildfire. I called my supervisor when I was off, but he was still working. And he's like, do you need help getting out of there? And I'm like, no, I think I'm fine. Like I could just like run to my car. So I did. I ran to my car and I didn't sleep that night. It was absolutely terrible. I was like, it hurt my heart so much to see so many of the plants that I love and the habitats and the trails I love to hike just up in flames. If you could please mute yourself, that'd be great. Thank you so much. And so what I want to talk about briefly is wildfire and mental well-being, right? So we have a ton of these invasive plants brought on by a lot by colonization, right? And so you have intergenerational harm that's being done in Southern California and across the world as an effect of colonialization. And one of the impacts of those invasive species that Europeans brought to Southern California is that we're having more frequent wildfires. And those invasive species are also spreading faster, in part because of climate change too, right? So that's one impact of on mental health and invasive species and climate change and stuff. But then we also have the fires themselves. So there's this study that I'm going to be talking about, the impact of wildfires on mental health, is scoping a review. So a review paper is when they gather all this literature. And this review looked at hundreds of papers and then narrowed their scope down to about 60. And the results show an increased rate of PTSD, depression, and generalized anxiety at several times of follow-up post-wildfire from the subacute phase. So that's like right during a wildfire, after a wildfire, to years after, right? So the effects of wildfire on people can be really strong, right? And people in Sunland can tell you about this. People that live in outside Malibu can tell you about this. Even people in the valley, right, that might not have as much money as people that live out in Malibu, but you're kind of stuck in the valley floor, right, in Pacoima and in Northridge and stuff. And then you already have really bad air quality. And then because of a wildfire, you're trapped in the valley and the air quality is even worse now, right? And so that indirect effect is really strong. Also, you have the secondary effects of ecological grief, solastagia, and eco-anxiety. And solastagia is kind of like similar to the other two as well. Of just kind of this like doom and gloom of like climate change, invasive species, wildfires, like like harm to indigenous populations. Like we're just always like inundated with these really sad truths, right? And these dramatic mega events can exacerbate that, right? So I think that mental health is something really important to discuss when talking about wildfires that I don't think it's discussed enough, but it is being discussed, and this paper is kind of a great example of it, kind of collecting the literature so people can have really meaningful conversations about it. All right, so let's go to me now, right? I'm a grad student. I study plant ecology, so how plants interact with their environment and with each other and with animals. I'm interested in spatial ecology, how things are distributed, dendroecology. I was going to say dendrochronology, but it's kind of both. I like studying trees, but I also like studying like tree rings, and sometimes that involves looking at growth in tree rings. One of the species that I'm super interested in is sagebrush, Artemisia tridentata, and this variety that's kind of local is Vasiana. I super like Artemisia tridentata variety tridentata though. That's probably my favorite. Wyominensis is like maybe a second. But so I'm interested in studying growth rings in sagebrush, right? I'm actually probably going to end up doing that for my PhD. I'm really excited, but fingers crossed. Some other things I'm interested in are the intersection between STEM and queerness of like LGBTQ individuals. And I'm also really interested in undergraduate food insecurity, as especially undergraduate STEM majors typically don't have access to a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, housing, financial security at all. And it's all kind of like, oh, like pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of mentality from the older generation. So I think this is something really important that needs to be constantly discussed in academia, is that we support undergrads that are trying to get into STEM. I've done a lot. I was a dog groomer for quite a few years. I love talking about dogs, get me talking and I won't stop. I used dog grooming to kind of get myself serious and get back into school, finish my associates, and then get into academia, where I've been a grading assistant, and then I was a field assistant. I've also been a botany tech and a botany lead, working alongside groups like USGS, BLM, the National Park Service, and then I've also been the biodiversity coordinator at CSUN's Institute for Sustainability. And occasionally I'm a botanical consultant for folks. I don't really like doing that too much. I like doing research, and I prefer to, have my energy be focused on getting my degree. So here's me working with the National Park Service, walking through a field of Deanandra fasciculata. It was really pretty. All right, so I'm going to talk about my master's now. So I'll talk about the intro, like some background about wildfire stuff. I'll talk about methods of like how we're doing what we're doing, some expected results. I didn't put this in here, but I'm going to show you some super preliminary results that you're the first ones to see, and some significance. And I also have some pictures of pretty plants that I saw. So, all right, here's one of my favorite ones. I think it smells like dough. People think it smells like different things. I love it. It's a great fire follow, Eucryptochrysanthifolia. I think it's super cute. Oh, by the way, I don't know if anyone's upset about this, but like we reintroduced Hydrophiliaceae. It used to be Boraginaceae, but then we went back to like how it used to be. And I don't know how many of you know this, but Jepson also did another revision. And so they did a revision in 2021, December. They've also done one in April 2022. So if you're not up to date on your taxa like revisions, they've updated like this year, and they're probably going to do it. I bet they're going to do another revision later this year. Wild times, wild times. Okay, so wildfires are increasing in severity and destruction, right? So this isn't a surprise, especially due to climate change and the spread of invasive species. Like we're having more frequent wildfires. Also, ignition sources are growing too. So we're having folks that are homeless. They're moving into the wild urban land interface as they're trying to find shelter and stuff, starting fires. Also, people littering and like smoking in wild spaces. Also, like upper class people deciding that they want to build a home in wild spaces where traditionally we didn't have people building giant mansions, right? All these things are driving like the frequency of ignition in these spaces. But we're all there, and so there's being an accumulation of damage too, right? So we're seeing more damage done to human structures, but also areas that are that had more frequent wildfires, like in forested areas, especially up north, right? Um, we're having a buildup of material that's causing like really severe wildfires, right? Where a wildfire would happen in a coniferous forest up in Northern California, maybe every 10 to 20 years. That space has gotten longer because of fire suppression and because of genocide, right? And so then you're having these really severe crown burning fires in coniferous forest that shouldn't really be happening. Things are changing. A lot of people are, doing prescribed burns, and we're having this kind of conversation. So the tides are changing. It's different for chaparral, and I'll talk a lot about that in like coastal sage scrub. But for like coniferous forest, I think it's important to talk about the importance of prescribed burns. Speaking of, so the flora of California is the way it is because of indigenous people, because of the massive amounts of prescribed and managed fires they were doing, because of how they are cultivating the landscape. And Southern California is not different, right? They were doing burns in Southern California historically for a variety of reasons, right? So like you might have a temporary village and you burn out the village when you're done done for the season, and you might burn it out before going to the other seasonal village, right, for the next season. You might clear an area out because of pest, because of pack rats, wood rats. Or you might clear it out because of an infestation of ticks, right? You might also use fire in terms of hunting, right? If you want to like get game to go into a certain area or follow a certain corridor, you might burn out certain areas. Or one reason that's really important to do fires is because the Tongva, the Tatavium, the Chumash, they actively cultivated the land, right? So they had fire following plants that they were consuming, right? Things like red maize, chia, tarweed, the seeds of, right? They were really important for them. And talk about an important food source that's oh my gosh, the genus. See, I'm used to saying Dicolostema capitulum, but like Dipterostrum capitatus, I think that's how you say it. Uh, blue dicks, right? It's super important for indigenous communities. And so these were plants that they would move around, they would actively cultivate. And then you have like potential things that they would use for baskets or for clothing or like building materials that they would also burn, so they could get different strength of material or a different like growth pattern, right? Like this Elemus condensatus. And so entire areas, and they also do impact, and I have that picture onto the right of like oak woodland with coastal sage scrub, also to change masting events or how much acorns like oak trees produce, right? They can manipulate that by you doing fires in certain years. So all really important uses for food and wildfire for indigenous communities that's important to think about, and the distribution of these plants on the landscape. But of course, there is European colonization by Spaniards, and then later by like Western Europeans in America during the Mexican-American War. And they brought a plethora of invasive species. Here I was showing eucalyptus, which most of us know burns prolifically in fires and actually resprouts great, and kind of creates its own little community of eucalyptus where it kind of makes it uninhabitable for a lot of native plants beneath it. This picture I have on the right was the Battle of Mustard. Is either mustard twigs or whatever. The proper name was during the Mexican-American War was the Battle of Santa Clara. And there was mustard in that area then that they were calling an entire battle by that name, right? So like the history of mustard in California as a whole as an invasive species has been pretty long now. And it's had a really big impact on the native vegetation too. And also it's had a really big impact on the types of and frequency of wildfires that it's important to talk about. I do want to talk about some of the biological aspects of fire, right? And this has been extensively studied by the Noongar of southwestern Australia. They're Aboriginal peoples that use fire a lot. And they use it to, like I said, for their food items, to get prey out, to manage the landscape. And they were the ones that kind of put the connection between fire followers and these fires, right? That certain plants germinate better after a wildfire, they're adapted to germinating, right? And so because of that, scientists that have been working the last 20 years use data from California, but use their words, the Kerouac, I might be saying that incorrectly, but for fire, to describe the chemical compound called carrageenans or CAR, and there's a whole class of different CAR compounds that come from burning woody material, right? And so the image on the right is kind of this like a tree, if you will, of adaptations through time to dealing with, you know, on the left-hand side, you have adaptations dealing with fire, and that came up out of the Carboniferous period when you have all these like ferns that were like building up, and then fires were breaking out to the oxygen-rich atmosphere, right? And one of the adaptations to that was to germinate specifically in a post-fire landscape where you can better reach another individual to mate with, right? Another way that you could possibly deal that is by having a symbiotic relationship with fungi. And that's kind of the green area on the right. So there's different ways that we can make ourselves more fit in a kind of bleak landscape, right? One way is by having a really close relationship to fungi and these fungal networks that are so important in the exchange of materials between plants and fungi. And the other way is by actually being stimulated by wildfire to germinate. And that's what carrageenans do. Some plants they upregulate germination, and some plants they downregulate germination. So I was consulted with Leslie Gorin on this illustration that she drew, and she did a fantastic job in it and super pretty. Leslie Gorin is a local artist in the Santa Monica Mountains, and you should definitely go buy like her handbags and stuff like that. She does fantastic stuff. But this is something we talked about like after the Woolsey fire of like what was going on. And the way I kind of described it was it's like waves of colors, and those waves happened in different weeks. And so at first, let's look at the back of the picture. You'll have things that are in those roots, right? Those big rooty structures like Maura macrocarpa, the wild cucumber. They survived the wildfire. And they, immediately send out all these vines and these flowers. It's just white, like green and whites. It's super pretty. And then you also have other rooty, bulby kind of things that come up like blue dicks and shooting stars and stuff like that. And Calistigia macrostygia, morning glory, like a lot of whites, a lot of pinks, super pretty purples. And then you have like those fire followers, the phacelias, the lupins, right, that are coming up that are stimulated by the wildfire. And then later you might have some oranges start to show up, some reds start to show up, fire poppies, California poppies, and more lupins and more phacelias. And it's just like color, color, color. And these seeds have just been waiting in the seed bank, right? Sometimes for decades, sometimes just for a few. We don't want it to be just a few years, but sometimes that's kind of what's happening, right? But they're just hanging out in there. And so there's different strategies for seed banking, right? So if you're in the seed bank and you're in it for the long haul, like, maybe like a blue dix, right? You're going to invest more into dormant seeds that are going to hang out in the seed bank for a really long time. And you're going to lose some to like, they're just going to get diseased or an animal is going to eat them or whatever. But then a wildfire happens, stimulates that germination, and then you're going to have, another round of growth, right? Or you might be a bulb of blue dicks and like just stimulate that way. And then you have things that are more late flowering, right? Like tarweed, clustered tarweed. And you might not invest that much into dormant seeds. I actually don't even know how long tarweed can live in the seed bank, but you might invest more energy into non-dormant seeds that might only last a year or two, or maybe more than that. And then still you're going to have issues like death or predation or deep burial. But, so different plants have different strategies for what they're investing into the seed bank, right? And that's really interesting. But if the area that you're looking at is burning too frequently, the seed bank can get exhausted with long-term plants, right? So Rick Halsey has this image on Chaparral Institute. I use so many of Rick's like pictures because his website's just so amazing and he does such extensive research. Um, so you have this area. This is a picture taken, I think, in San Diego County. You have the side on the right that's burned really frequently, right? Wildfires like almost all the time, and it's a ton of invasive annuals. There's not many shrubs in that area. The big shrubs don't have time to recharge the seed bank, and so you get like a lot of these invasive grasses. Left of that, in the middle, you kind of have this like intermediate kind of coastal sage grub kind of community. I think I noticed a lot of like Acma sponglab or deerweed and stuff like that. It's also been hypothesized that coastal sage grub is kind of an intermediate stage before chaparral. I could kind of see that, but also, so like you have a lot of you might still have a lot of invasive species in that area, but that might also be a successional stage for chaparral too. So that period of 30 years is probably enough time for shrubs to recharge the seed bank. I think it's 12 years for some shrubs to recharge the seed bank, or like around that time period, but for others it might be more like 20 years or something, right? But then you have an area in the back that hasn't burned since 1970, and it's like kind of this really lush chaparral, right? Where it might not be that species rich. It might just be like a few shrub species, and then a lot of stuff's hanging out in the seed bank waiting for its opportunity to bloom. It just depends, right? And there's different types of chaparral that interact differently with and have different assemblages of plants. So don't mean to like generalize too much, but too frequent of wildfires can definitely have an effect on the assemblage of plants that show up in a landscape. And with that in mind, you don't want to say like, oh, well, we should just be doing burns all around Los Angeles all the time. Like that wasn't really the way it was in the past either. Like we don't have that many lightning strikes in Southern California compared to like Northern California. So these natural incidences of wildfire aren't necessarily happening with the frequency that they are in Northern California as they are in Southern California. And also like the historical return interval. So when a fire comes back for Southern California might be from like 30 years to 150 years, where that's going to be a much shorter time period in like Northern California, where a wildfire of every 10 to 20 years is pretty normal for the vegetation community, and actually probably encouraged, so that like we don't have severe crown fires that are like destroying a lot of the pine trees and stuff like that. So that generalization that, oh, we need to be doing more prescribed burns like everywhere, it just doesn't work for the entire state. We're a huge state. We're diverse. We have a lot of different plants, a lot of different cultures. And like you can't make like big generalizations about any kind of vegetation community. Let's talk about the Santa Monica Mountains. So the Santa Monica Mountains is, oh my gosh, I hope I'm not wrong about this, the largest urban national park. It's really big, and I'm sure a lot of you go to there all the time. There's a huge diversity of like things you can do, and like there's rock formations, and there's like cool historical buildings, there's oceans, and I mean ocean views and vistas and stuff, and tide pools, and really great trails to hike on, a ton of wildlife and wild flora. It's just like amalgam of, you know, state, federal, private, nonprofit land, right? And it's not all protected the same, right? There might be like really strict like building rules in like certain areas, but like some areas are developed more than others, right? And so yeah, really cool space, but that's primarily what we're going to be talking about. And like I said before, the Woolsey Fire really did a number. I think it burned, again, hope I'm not wrong about this, about 90% of the federally owned lands within the Santa Monica Mountains. It was massive. This is a burn severity map that shows like where the wildfire impacted the Santa Monica Mountains, right? So that kind of reddish area is showing the extent of the wildfire. I'm sorry, NASA. That was from NASA, but I'm sure USGS uses data too. And so like what happened after that, right? What was the post-fire recovery? Here's like a shrub that I took a picture of Adenosma fasciculatum or chamise or greasewood that's resprouting after the wildfire. So let's talk about methods, right? How we're going to study plants that come up after the wildfire. And this is one of our sites filled with Lupinus succulentus, Arroyo lupin, also some Brassica nigra in there too, and some other plants. But the National Park Service pretty much already does this, right? So they have a massive network of sites that they monitor, some every single year, others not so much, like they space them out based on like statistical modeling. It's really cool. And so you might be asking, like, well, why are you doing this? Or why did you do this? So I worked with folks at UCLA, at Cal State Channel Islands, and Cal State Northridge, and a ton of undergraduates. And we studied this month after month, which is something that the National Park Service doesn't normally get to do. So instead of like year after year, it was like month after month after the wildfire, right? And it's mostly led by Dr. Brad Schaefer and Joey Curdy, who's a PhD candidate at UCLA. So some questions that I have, right? What sort of plants, native and invasive assemblages come up after a wildfire in the first few months, right? And then how can vegetation monitoring help inform management decisions about wildfire? And then how can we get undergrads, that group of undergraduate students that I'm kind of very passionate about, how can we get them more experience in field and fire ecology to be excited to be biologists, or just get them like things to put on their CV so they can go on to like medical school and stuff like that and be successful. So like I said, these were the primary universities. We also had like Glendale Community College, Moore Park College, also some folks from Mountains Restoration Trust, which is now combined with Tree People. So we had like a ton of different people at around 34 sites, and they monitored a single site from about 1 to 6 months, right? We would have liked them to stay all 6 months, but some people, life happens, right? And they were only able to do it one or a few times. And here's kind of the breakdown of those sites, right? So on the left, you have all the different sites that we had across the Santa Monica Mountains. And on the x-axis on the bottom, you have the months that they were able to stay out. Now, I didn't use all these sites for any data analysis you're going to see today. Undergraduates, they had a variety of things that they turned in. Some were really high quality, some were fairly low quality. And as some people on this meeting can tell you, I worked really, really hard at identifying their plot photos. I had to work really hard at identifying their cue cards where they kept plants that I had to identify and then link to their data sheets. Like, it was a ton of staring at computers. I probably worked on data analysis for like 5 or 6 months of just like constantly staring at computers. I went through like 3 or 4 different undergraduates that helped me as I called out plant names and stuff like that. So it was a ton of work. But on the right hand side, I just want to kind of illustrate the difference between February and July. And I love this picture. So like February, right after the wildfire, you have something like Peonia californica, California peony. It's kind of like poking its head out of the ground, and it's like really super cute. And then all the way in July, you still have stuff that's like rock and rolling, the Calistigia macrostygia, but also like eucalyptus that like is a pretty decent at handling wildfires and adapted to wildfires. And then in the background, you have a lot of Dianandra fasciculata too. So like there's stuff to observe that whole time period. Like stuff, just because it's July doesn't mean it like all poops out, though like a lot does, but yeah. So how did we do it, right? So we had 10, they had 10 plots along what's called a quadrat, or I'm sorry, 10 1 by 1 meter quadrats. Quadrats are those like, that kind of like square that he's holding, right? So it's 1 meter by 1 meter. A meter's like 3 feet and something, right? So they would look at all the species within the quadrat along a 100-meter transect, right? And so every 10 meters, about every 30 feet or so, whatever, they would look at the vegetation in there and they'd put a flag by it so they could return to that exact spot the next month too. They looked at things like what plants were there, how much they were covering that square, and then they would count them too. And they would also measure burn severity from the burnt shrub limb thickness, right? And you might be thinking, what the heck is that? So we have like different burn severities, right? So there's like low intensity fires that I would like grasslands, right? Like it burns really fast, it just goes through them. You could almost say it's like a cooler wildfire, like temperature wise, maybe. Yeah, that's probably accurate. And then that would be like there's a picture on the left. It shows like kind of like greener space. That's like a low intensity wildfire. Then you have the M in the bottom of that kind of evergreen picture. It's a moderate intensity, right? That's kind of like probably burning branches. It's not just burning the understory, it's burning branches. It might not hit the crown, but it's like pretty hot. And then you have high intensity crown fires that are pretty much killing everything, right? And so if you look on the right hand side, I have a pineapple. No, it's Hesperia ecologist. But it shows kind of like a range of different fire intensities. I can see off in the distance little twigs, so maybe that area didn't get burned that severely, but there was definitely a wildfire that went through there. So if you're still able to see leaves and twigs, that's probably a lower intensity fire than if like that shrub is just a stump. That's probably a high intensity fire. So here's our plots that like my site that I took pictures of from February to March, just to give you kind of an idea of what that data collection looked like. And this is for me and my team. Other teams' pictures look different. In April, I was out a little too late. So it goes from like evening to like nighttime pretty quickly. But luckily I was able to identify all the plants and count them correctly. But that's why kind of why it looks a little darker on that side. One of my coworkers was out with me that day, Jake. That was great. But so here's like right in February, like a few months after the wildfire, you see some crypta and some lupins, super pretty. Then a month later, right? The stuff's growing up, right? Then you're starting to see things like chaparral bush mallow, and the lupins are getting bigger, and the phacelia is getting bigger. Then the phacelia is starting to flower, right? And then in April, we had the painted lady migration of butterflies. I think we're just going at it on the lupin. So all of our lupins got stripped. But and there's probably a ton of caterpillars in that picture too. But that was really neat. And then you have May, where the shrubs are getting bigger and like starting to work their way through the canopy. A lot of the lupins probably starting to poop out. And then you have the phacelia that's flowering, but the leaves are probably mostly dried up. You have June, where the phacelia is pretty much done. It's a nest and ready to release its seeds. But the shrubs, the Malacothymus fasciculatus, is still growing pretty strong and getting much taller, right? So that's probably what this community is going to then end up becoming in the future, is like a lot of chaparral bush mallow. And then July, right? That's pretty much the only living thing in that area, other than a lot of the seeds in the seed bank, right? So most of what is left is just native shrubs. So what we would do is the students would put the pictures they would put plant material on cue cards, take pictures of it, and then I would use that and their pictures to kind of cross-reference to try to identify them. I'd use the Jepson manual, and also the Jepson manual, specifically the eFlora, because that's what like gets updated the most. And then also the Santa Monica Mountains wildflowers website and app. It's like the best. You all should like use it frequently. It's really cool. I love that app so much. All right, so what are some of my hypotheses that I'm looking at? Well, higher burn severity will reflect more native plants, and lower burn severity will affect more invasive plants. This is me sticking my neck out there, seeing if what I believe is true, right? Another hypothesis, undergraduate data will be more robust than simply just community science data. Now, undergraduate data is kind of a type of community science, but I'm specifically talking about things like iNaturalist, which I'm interested in using data from as well. And then providing more money and incentives to undergraduates could make future projects easier to run. And I kind of intend to use some sociological data that we collected from surveys sending out to undergraduates. It's not all positive, but I think that's really important to talk about in order to get representation higher within the STEM fields. So what are some expected results, right? Statistical analysis will identify biotic and abiotic influences on successional growth post-fire, such as proximity to trails, which we would expect like more invasives, and then the ratios of native and invasive plants, especially in regards to burn severity. And the SAM analysis will be compared to community science data from iNaturalis and nearby plots to ascertain if the two data sets are leading to similar results. I'm going to show you some preliminary results, which is cool because I have never talked about this before. So I ended up throwing out a lot of sites that weren't up to my standard. But the burn severity stuff where they measured twigs using a caliper, that was actually pretty good data. So I used 27 sites and I compared the burn severity to USGS data for their burn severity, and I compared it to twig thickness. Like I talked about again, the thicker the twig, the higher the burn severity, and the smaller the twig, the lower the burn severity. Supported in the literature, and pretty cool. The next thing I have been doing is I have 17 sites that I'm going to examine just February, right after the wildfire, of what happened, right? They might not have data for the rest of the time period, or it might not be quality enough data, but 17 sites, I have really good data for just right after the wildfire in that first kind of month. And then for 10 sites, I have data from February to May of the wildfire, and I'm really interested in changes in phenology, right? When do the shrubs pop up? When do the native fire followers, when do they kind of like teeter out? When do the invasive species kind of poop out and then are replaced more so in the canopy, at least, by native shrubs and stuff like that? So those are the kind of questions I have that I'm excited to look at that specific data set with. Okay, going right into it. So this is for the month of February. I've found that burn severity is statistically significantly correlated to the abundance of fire followers. So as the twigs get thicker, like I said, you have more fire followers. And these are plants that are adapted to fire that are on the landscape. And I'm going to show you in a bit why this isn't that surprising, but it's still kind of cool to get a significant result. This also was seen in native plants, right? A lot of fire followers are native, not big a surprise. So the higher the burn severity, the more native plants that showed up in a plot. And the opposite trend was true for non-native plants. The more non-native plants you had, the indicated the lower burn severity in the area. So a lot of like invasive grasslands, they have kind of those cooler fires I was talking about. So if you had more non-natives in an area, it probably didn't burn that severely or that hot. And again, not surprising. On the left, you have Rancho Sierra Vista. If that area burned, there probably wouldn't be a ton of native plants that would show up in plots. It'd mostly be kind of these invasive annual grasses. It probably wouldn't be a ton of fire followers either. Maybe like some historic fire followers that are eking out in existence, but like it's mostly going to be invasives. If the right side burned, which is I think it's somewhere in Topanga. I don't know where that picture is. I took it off of Google. But if the right side burned, I bet there'd be a ton of fire followers in that picture and a lot of native plants, but probably not a lot of non-native plants. And that place is going to burn really severely. Look at all that woody material. That woody material is going to burn a lot hotter than the like dry grassy stuff. But the woody material is going to burn slower, and it's going to burn probably less frequently than the stuff on the left-hand side, which is going to burn more frequently and burn very quickly. Which leads me to this. So I tried looking at, this is a non-significant result. And some of the scientists in here might be like, why is he showing this? I think it's really important to talk about non-significant results. So on the bottom, I have burn severity as recorded by USGS. And on the left hand, on the y-axis, I have the thickness of the twig. And I didn't find a relationship between USGS burn severity post-Woolsey fire and my metric that I've been using, which is the thickness of the twig. It's like, oh my gosh, Richard, why are you again? Why are you showing us this? I think it's still interesting. I don't think it says anything that the burn severity of using twigs is wrong necessarily, but how I'm gathering burn severity from USGS might be. Let me show you why. So here's the map in which I generated those data points from of burn severity. The more red on that pixelated map is like higher burn severity, and the green or the more green is like there probably wasn't a wildfire there. And you can see evidence of that in one of our plots, right? So there's kind of like that arrow shaped like red spot, and it matches really well with like what looks like a lot of like, I don't know, mustard and grasses and stuff like that. And it's kind of like in that corner, like what is that, 10 o'clock? Like 10 o'clock corner. You can kind of see where the burn severity or the wildfire had the biggest effect, where the fire score probably still is. I averaged that whole circle into one value for burn severity. And that's kind of how I got that data point, right? Because I don't actually know where the undergraduates collected their twig measurements. I just have these averages based on basically within 100 meters of a GPS point where I think they went. This is where potentially using national park data set could be much more valuable, because they have really spatially precise data of where they're collecting vegetation. My data set, I have a lot of uncertainty of where the undergraduates worked. And so I couldn't say the burn severity was at that point and make that average. I had to actually average the entire 100 meters around it, just to be fair, because I actually don't know where they collected those twig measurements. And so I'm losing a lot of what we call ecology heterogeneity in that data by getting the mean. And so I'm getting this value that's probably not accurate to what that landscape, the complexity of that landscape during a wildfire. It's kind of interesting. So the next few months, I'll be analyzing 4-month data using multivariate analysis. I'll be collecting and collaborating with National Park Service using their vegetation monitoring. And then I'll also be gleaning community science data from iNaturalist, which is I'm really excited about. And then I'm also going to be examining undergraduate student evaluations from the project. And I'm also going to be visiting a lot the PhD program I want to get into, studying wildfire and sagebrush steppe. So I'm really excited about that too. Hopefully, fingers crossed, I get in. I'm like 90% sure I got into the program, but yeah. So fire ecology research that highlights the importance of undergraduate contribution is lacking, and we hope to show ways not only to push the field forward with month-to-month monitoring, but to advance the careers of students often unfairly represented in academia. Here's a really pretty fire follower, Phacelia hubbii, which gave me a gnarly burn on my wrist. Be careful of Phacelias. They're really pretty and they have great defenses, so don't rub too much on Phacelias. If you have questions, here's my Instagram handle and my iNaturalist handle, _wandering_ecologist. Someone has stolen my Instagram identity, and I've been dealing with that for the last few days. They use periods instead of underscores, so please make sure to use underscores. My Twitter is ecology of wander, and my email address is there. Please don't be shy about reaching out. I love talking with people. And I have some cool plants that I can like show you too. But does anyone have any questions?
Do you want to unshare? I'm unshare and we can see your face. That sounds good.
I guess, but I have some really cute plant pictures, so you might want me to share again. Like,
oh, okay. I thought you were done.
I'm done, but I also have cute plant pictures. Yeah, I think Jordan.
Okay, somebody's already saying show plants. And somebody's saying I didn't know Phacelias would irritate the skin.
Yeah,
They can.
If you want to moderate the chat and give me questions while I show cute plant pictures,
Okay, share some more. Okay, share your screen.
Yeah, I'm still muted. Weird. I love white bleeding hearts, Arundel Orcaluca. They're like so gorgeous. Probably my favorite fire follower. But yeah, please ask questions if you have any, or Snowdy, if you want to give me any questions. I'll just like flip through some of these.
How do rain events post-fire impact can affect, whoops, lost it. How do rain events post-fire impact affect the results you found?
We had a pretty slightly average to above average year of rain in 2019. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but it was like people felt pretty good about it. And I think that combination of a disturbance on the landscape, some areas hadn't seen wildfire in a while, some areas probably burnt way too frequently. So you had this kind of heterogeneous mix of time intervals between wildfires on the landscape. And then you had a pretty decent rain event, 2019, which, remember, with climate change, our rain events are going to be more sporadic. Some years are going to be even more rain. Most years are going to be like drought conditions. But we kind of lucked out with the Woolsey Fire. And in a previous talk, the National Park botanist talked about how species richness actually went up in a lot of the Santa Monica Mountains post-Woolsey Fire. And so we saw a lot of species that in bigger numbers too. And again, I think that's not only a disturbance and a heterogeneous landscape, but also like, yeah, a decent rain event. I wouldn't say it was like super bloom status, but it was good. And nothing to make light of.
Somebody's asking for you to restate, I think it was your Instagram.
Yeah, that's my Instagram. I'm like not posting as much lately as, I don't know, I used to. I'm a little disillusioned by social media at the moment. I don't know. I'm also like, I've been spending like so much time staring at a computer. I'm not even hiking that much these days. Like the last trip I went on was the Santa Rosa Island. It was super pretty. But like I'm not posting that much, but I try to. And I try to post about research and funny memes and stuff like that. And I love community outreach. I love doing talks like this and meeting people and going to restoration events and stuff.
Well, somebody's asking for an explanation, and maybe you should ask the Monarchs this, but how can a population go from 2,000 to 250,000?
Oh yeah, you gotta find a monarch biologist for that. But like insects do that. Insects have these like boom and bust kind of cycles all the time. I just recently met a conservation biologist who mostly endangered plants with California Fish and Wildlife. He was laughing. He's like, "Oh yeah, monarchs are doing so great because their numbers are higher last year." And he's totally right. Like that doesn't mean much. You got to look at like the big scale of things, how monarchs are doing. And the math adds up. Someone did a back of the envelope calculation. Like if this female monarch had this many eggs, and then the next generation, she had that many eggs. So monarchs have between 4 and 6, whatever, around there, generations per year. So the monarch that's overwintering in Biono wetlands isn't the same monarch that's going to come back the next year, right? So, but by back of the envelope calculations, it's totally possible that we went from like 2,000 to 200,000. We also probably had a really weird event where Eastern monarchs crossed over the Rocky Mountains and came to the West Coast. So we're looking at genomic data too for monarchs. I contributed significantly to that, where I collected dead individuals of monarchs, mostly killed by birds that would just throw them up. And so we sent that information to the Dr. Chris Funk's lab at CSU Fort Collins, where he's going to be doing genomic analysis of a lot of the migratory monarchs. He's super cool too. And then there's also like this mixing population of Eastern and Western monarchs in Arizona in the Sonoran Desert. So that's really funky too. There's monarchs that kind of overwinter in that area as well as like Florida. So Florida also has residential monarchs. And then now residential monarchs are becoming a thing in like Texas and Louisiana. And of course, we have residential monarchs in Los Angeles too, in San Francisco. So that complicates things. Are they adding to the population? Are they reservoirs for disease? Are they hurting the population? They're not migrating often, but can they be converted to migratory monarchs? Are they converting migratory monarchs into residential monarchs? There's a lot of unknowns. And I don't know, if someone gave me money, I might study it. But like, I'm always willing to help out with the data collection, but I don't know about studying it for my PhD dissertation. But there's excitement. So if you want to go get a PhD, there's a ton of excitement about monarchs. So that's a cash cow right there.
Okay, I have a bunch of questions backed up here. I'm going to try to take them in order. Somebody was asking, would anybody be doing prescribed burns in areas slated for development?
I don't know.
I think not, but that's not the question. I'm not sure who could answer such a question, but
what happens often in areas that are developed or like going to be developed is they do like bulldozer lines, and they like widen roads and like widen like vegetation clearing. But that's pretty controversial too, because then you have like a lot, what fills in that space of where shrubs were, you have a lot of invasive annual grasses that fill that space. So if that's not properly managed, all the mustard's not properly managed, you might still get wildfires in those cleared areas. But prescribed burns in developed areas, I don't know. Like there was just in the news that area that in New Mexico that had a prescribed burn, and it went out of control and turned into a gigantic fire. So timing's really important with prescribed burns, and like a lot of indigenous leaders are like experts in this field, so I think they're more better prepared to answer those kind of questions. But yeah, that's a complicated topic.
how many years would you expect to see of fire followers showing up after a burn?
So like it depends, right? So you might have a ton of Phacelia hubbii come up the first year after wildfire, but then like soon after it might just like disappear into the seed bank, and any Phacelia we do see might just end up being Phacelia secutaria, a sister taxa to it. It depends on the species. Like I see like Eucrypta pop up in areas that haven't burnt in a while. Things like Venegacia carpicioides, the Kenyan sunflower, like it grows in areas that haven't burnt in wildfires, the areas that have burned in wildfires. It'll persist in post-wildfire landscapes for years to come, but then maybe like kind of peter out. It totally depends. But like Astragalus browntonii, like the Broughton's milk vetch, it's a fire follower. It'll live for about like 3 to 6, 7 years or something. The shrub dies, right? And then you might not see it till the next wildfire. So I don't know if Broughton's milk vetch, or until Edison clears out a line of fire road, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, where did this milk vetch come from? That disturbance of like that tractor kind of like got the Astragalus to start germinating. But like maybe it wasn't a good time for it to germinate, and like when it fills the seed bank, like maybe those seeds are delicious for birds. So maybe that's a disturbance that we shouldn't tolerate. I don't know, it depends, and that's the answer I think ecologists will give you for so many of these types of questions. I'm really sorry if that's not satisfactory.
Somebody just wanted to clarify, are you presenting or at the conference in October?
Yeah, so I'll be presenting this with more results. But yeah, I'll be presenting my wildfire stuff. I titled my talk, We Didn't Start the Fire, which I thought was really clever. But I don't know how many of you get that, but okay. But yeah, I'll be presenting that, as well as I got another scholarship to do workshops before the CMPS conference. I'm really, really excited about those. So they have these botanical workshops that they're going to be doing beforehand. Things like how to be a better consultant, or how to do rare plant surveys. I'm so excited for those kind of things. I'm such a nerd, but yeah, I'm really excited to nerd out with other people, botanists, about at the conference, and non-botanists alike.
Okay, moving on. What do you perceive to be the greatest invasive plant threat?
That's a good question. Maybe Bromus rubens and Bromus magitensis, and whoever can tell them apart. Like annual grasses are pretty much up there. Avena fatua, Avena barbata. I definitely put Brassica nigra and Hirschfeldia incana up there. Hirschfeldia incana was in a ton of my sites. That's a pretty bad one. And that one's not always annual. Hirschfeldia can, like the Mediterranean mustard, it's like sometimes perennial. And that's a scary one. It's a huge problem. Brassica nigra, though, you go in the Santa Monica Mountains, it's just fields and fields of it. I don't know if we'll ever be able to do anything about it. I'm a little pessimistic about that. There are, the National Park Service has this page, invasive bully plants. There's like 25 species that I think we can do really good stuff with in terms of removal. Things like Cardurus pycnocephalus, Italian thistle is on there. Tree of Heaven is on there. And I think we have a lot of possibility of removing those from the Santa Monica Mountains. And I am optimistic about a lot of those species. But then you have things like Bromus rubens and Brassica nigra, and I don't know what can be done. And Brassica nigra has been here since maybe even before, slightly before the 1700s. Erodium Secutarium too, we've been able to watch it spread through like adobe bricks and some of the original structures that were built here. And that was probably even spread by rodents that brought it here from Baja California, which was brought historically in the 1600s and 1500s from Europe, so where Erodium Secutarium is native to. And so like animals love a lot of, like, especially Erodium Secutarium, and they eat the seeds and even help in its dispersal. I don't know. It's sad to think about, and it like I said before, climate change is going to make this problem even worse, where we're spreading the range of these invasive species, and more disturbance, more frequent wildfires. We're setting them up to dominate the landscape to soon where, maybe the Santa Monica Mountains will resemble more the Great Plains. I mean, not the Great Plains, the Great Basin, right, where we just have tons of Bromus tectorum everywhere, cheatgrass. I hope that's not the case, but yeah.
This is a related question. Is looking at mustard, for instance, what's an effective way to remove it? That maybe is a subject for another talk, but
that's it. Who's an expert in this would be really cool to have talk, and I'm sure I think he's the current president of our chapter, right? Bill Neal.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's here this evening, but yeah, with the weed removal is a whole different thing.
Yeah. It's
okay.
thorny too.
We do have small groups that in certain areas we remove things like mustard.
Oh, totally. Shout out to George and Steve Hartman and George.
Yeah, that group. So
not George Sherman. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I saw George in this group. Why am I forgetting George? What's George's last name? I'm totally forgetting.
Waddell.
Yeah, thank you, Waddell. Yeah. But they're doing amazing work at the Sepulveda Basin, getting rid of Hirschfeldia incana. Go help out. Go donate your time. I think they're on Tuesday mornings, for sure on Saturday mornings, right at sunrise, and they take so much weeds out of the Sepulveda Basin, and they're transforming that place. It is gorgeous. Yeah.
We've also done work in Caballero Canyon. So, all right, there's more questions. Somebody wanted the Colorado Monarch researcher link.
Oh, the Funk Lab. Okay,
Yeah,
well,
I don't know. That passed me by, so.
Google thought I was talking to it. Can that person reach out to me? And then if they're potentially interested in donating dead monarchs, I can link them with, because they have to get certified through the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's a really easy test. And you know that you're gonna promise not to like poach monarchs or anything. But and then you would eventually send your stuff to Chris at Colorado State University, Fort Collins. But yeah, why don't you reach out to me directly?
Okay. Somebody asked for clarification on which tar plant
Oh, there
you
are.
were. Let me look at this. The Santa Cruz tar plant produces two types of seeds with different germ strategies. Disc seeds germ readily with no treatment, and ray seeds have long-term dormancy, presumably a fire following Q.
Oh, that makes sense.
Is it the same with the tar plant you studied?
I haven't looked into the seed banking of the Enandra fasciculata. Just from what I've seen in the literature, it's mostly non-dormant seeds. There might be someone in this group that's probably more knowledgeable about that. From what I've seen, it does best like it can it does best kind of like year after year. But like I think there are a proportion of the seeds that go dormant. This is fasciculata, the clustered tarweed. Um, yeah, I'm not sure about the Channel Islands one. That's interesting. Is that, I don't know if that's what you said. I don't even know who said that.
Yeah, it was, hang on. The Santa Cruz tar plant was mentioned in the
Is that
question.
like Carrie, is that like the Santa Cruz Island or like Santa Cruz the city? I don't even know. But that's cool. Plants are weird and cool. I love them.
Oh, another question. How did Stipa pulchra respond in the first spring and 3 years following in the Simi Hills and Santa Monica Mountains?
Um, there's probably people on this call that are better answer that question. A few of my plots did have stipopulchra. In areas that didn't burn too severe, what would happen would right after the wildfire, bunches of the plant would still be there, so the roots would be unburned mostly, and all the top tissue would get burned off, but like the bunch grass still survived, right? So then you had stipopulchra growing and seeding after that. Um, in 3 years after, I don't know. I think like stipopulchra grassland in much of Southern California isn't doing great. I think it's like very often invaded by non-native grasses. So whether that's from too frequent of wildfires or what, because there's probably wildfires in stipopulchra grassland. There's an area in the San Fernando Valley, Tampa Wilbur Park, that has spectacular stipopulchra grassland with Corythogeny phlogophilia, with like Astragalus trichopodes. Like, oh, it is gorgeous. And like, there's like these ravines with like coastal sage scrub and like black walnut like groves. And like that park is just so underappreciated. It's filled with trash. It's like dangerous, like people fall off the cliff there. Um, I want that CNPS to kind of take Wilbur Tampa Park and like make it like what the Sepulveda Basin is, because it's some of the best native grassland I've seen in the area. But who knows? I don't know. That's a good question though. I think Stipopulchra can handle quite a bit of disturbance. Not like too much, but like at Wilbur Tampa, it gets like mowed and it's fine year after year, which is just blows my mind. I just saw a grassland of Stipopulchra with like Dudleya greenii on Santa Rosa Island. Like a grassland of Dudleya. Like, is that not like mind breaking? It was like the most gorgeous thing. And our native state grass with like Dudleya, like such an emblematic like conservation genus, is so cool. Yeah.
Someone's asking where that park is.
It's up Tampa. Is it up Tampa or is it up Wilbur? It's up either Wilbur or Tampa.
Tampa north of the 118.
Yeah.
Louise is saying.
Yeah, totally. In Porter Ranch. It's so pretty. I love that park so much. I think it was in ET too. Or like it's either that park or like a close by park that was in ET. But yeah, I love it.
So somebody's asking to see your Santa Rosa Island botany photos. I guess that's
Uh-oh.
in the future, right?
I don't know. I'm like, yeah, it was cool. I saw a lot of rare stuff that I don't feel super comfortable sharing. But yeah, it was fun. I really enjoyed it. I saw a lot of really cool island endemic scorpions and island endemic crickets, and we found an island endemic bee. I was actually with a bee researcher. Her name's Crystal Hickman, or her Instagram handle is bee sip. So like sipping on like tea, BEESIP. She has gorgeous macro photography pictures of bees, and she's writing a book, ABC Native Bees, and it's going to show the diversity in California of native bees. And she does fantastic work. So I went with her. And so I tried to focus mostly on bees, but I did take some really cool island endemic plant pictures and stuff. But yeah.
That was all the questions that I caught in the chat. So is there anybody else that wants to ask a question before we close?
If
If
you
you
were
were a fire follower, which would you want to be and why?
That's such a magical question. What would I be? It's okay. So for my analysis, I've been using a list of fire followers assembled by the fire ecologist of the national park, Marty Witter, and her niece. It's been really useful. There's a plant that I love that's not technically a fire follower, but it did show up in some of my plots. I really love it. It's poison oak, Toxico Dendron Diversalopium. I am such a poison oak fan. Almost all animals don't react to poison oak. Humans are one of the only ones. And it's a great habitat builder, and it's just gorgeous. It's like green, and then it turns red, and then it's like green and red, and it has these pretty fruits, these drupes. I love poison oak, and I wish more people liked it. Um, I don't react to it, but I think a lot of other people do. So you should be cautious around it.
Don't react to it yet.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction to make. But I love poison oak. I think it gets a lot of hate. Louise, I'm also extremely concerned about all the fountain grass around Corriganville. That area off the 118 burns all the time, and it's super problematic. And I don't think a lot of people are doing enough to get rid of the fountain grass. And Caltrans was using it for like road stabilization and stuff. Okay, Drew asked, where can I get more information about restoration site volunteering? So CNPS has like these weeding groups, right, that go out to areas like the Sepulveda Basin or I can't say that, Caballero Canyon, Snowdy, is that right?
Yeah, Caballero Canyon.
Yeah.
It's on our webpage.
But there's also groups like Tree People that are Tree People's doing great work at like San Francisco Canyon, and then all across the Santa Monica's. SAMO Fund works with like the restoration ecologist Joey Algiers in the Santa Monica Mountains at places like Rancho Sierra Vista. And then Antonio Sanchez has a great native plant nursery. If you want to learn how to like do native plant propagation and care for plants and stuff, I think he'll give you plants if you put in time and volunteering with him. And he's just such a wealth of knowledge. So the National Park Service is a really good place to go for weeding and volunteering opportunities. Also, Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains.
Yes.
Yeah. So RCD has weeding events. One of the sites that I'm really passionate about is, hey Mark, could you mute yourself? Sorry.
I'm so
Um,
sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's okay, Mark. Good to see you. One of the areas that RCD does restoration at that's super cool is Leo Carrillo. And this was historically a migratory monarch overwintering site. It hasn't been used very actively by monarch butterflies recently, which is a problem. So they're doing a lot of restoration there, removing invasive species, and then planting native trees that'll hopefully one day usurp the eucalyptus that's there and kind of unsustainable. Yes, Brody, thank you. With Friends of the Biono Wetlands too. Just a lot of really cool stuff. And those areas are really important for overwintering monarchs too. Brody, it's nice to see you as well. We've corresponded briefly.
So people who are interested in invasive plant control, they should look at the Calypsy website. There's a huge amount of information on that website on how to do control. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Richard, sorry, this is Mark. Yeah, I was unmuted because I wanted to ask you something and I forgot, and then I sprayed my plate. Sorry about that. Hey, can't match your passion, buddy. Love your passion. Thank you for that. I just wanted to mention the graph that you showed, the DNBR versus the oh my gosh, the
thickness.
twig. Yeah, twig diameter. Yeah. We, Marty and I did a study also in the Santa Monica's, and then there was low correlation too. So it might be related to your sampling methodology, but it's also probably just a feature of messy coastal sage grub and chaparral compared to the bark maps. So I would definitely consider that as well. So it's, I don't know if you've talked to Marty about this, but yeah, that's a common thing with Southern California shrublands. Our bark maps don't really correlate that well with on the ground measurements. So don't fret too much about that.
No way. You are blowing my mind right now. I'm so excited.
Yeah, we have some data too. And yeah, thanks for all the plugs about the great organizations doing restoration. Totally appreciate it.
Yeah, people are moving mountains on the mountain range. Yeah. No, Mark, thank you. I'm excited to talk with you all, and John and Brad Schaefer, and yeah, that made me really excited. I don't know how many of you caught that, but yeah. Ooh, cool.
I do want to also emphasize that you, Richard, you mentioned in your talk that really we are not the traditional caretakers of the lands that we occupy. So there have been many people over the last more than 10,000 years taking care of our natural environment. So you mentioned the Tongva, the Tavium, the Shumash, and there are many more groups in the state of California. So, you know, keep that in mind as our history and our prehistory.
And our continued, you know,
and our continued
like the
involvement. Yes.
The Tatavium Land Conservancy is actively managing land in the San Fernando Valley and Santa Clarita. Like, if that's another great organization to look into, the Tatavium Land Conservancy. They're so cool, and there's a lot of Chumash groups as well, and a lot of Tongvan activists and stuff that are doing like phenomenal work with land back and conservation work on the ground. So absolutely, like
I think we're going to see a lot happening over the next many years, few years in California, especially, of giving back autonomy to open spaces to the people who were here way before Europeans. So let's think about the positive thoughts about that effort, and anytime we can support that kind of effort through contacting our government entities and things, I think we should all keep that forward in our thoughts. All right, guys. Unless I hear otherwise, I'm going to say a big thank you to everyone who attended and to Richard, who gave such a beautiful presentation to us. And we look forward to his presentation at the conference in October, and also encountering him in Southern California with monarchs, weed control, whatever. Thank you so much, Richard.
Especially before I leave out of the state hopefully for my PhD. So yeah, catch me before I leave. But yeah.
Where are you going?
I hope to be going to Boise, Idaho to do my PhD. So fingers crossed that I get in. I'm like 90% sure.
Okay, maybe I know somebody there that can make sure that you never ever leave California. Let's put in.
But I'll still be
teasing. I know nobody in Boise.
Right. I'll still be working on the Monarch project though.
Okay.
So,
I'm teasing. Okay.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
All right. All right. Good night. See you guys thanks so much. Bye-bye.